The funeral is about to begin, sir.
Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore, joined as always by
Anthony Ray Bench.
And we have a very special guest on today's podcast.
I'm so excited. This is awesome.
I am so excited because this movie, Phantasm, changed me as a kid. I mean, I saw it when I was the lead character as a kid.
Yeah.
I was around the same age as he was in the film, and we're going to be talking to Don Coscarelli about Phantasm Remastered, which is recently come out in a new Blu-ray special edition, multiple commentary tracks, tons of extras, and it's a restored version. And there's a couple of interesting things about it I'm dying to talk to him about. But Don Coscarelli also has a book out called True Indie: Life and Death in Filmmaking that is a hysterical book. Lots of just great stories about indie filmmaking. Lots of stories like they just didn't know what they couldn't do, which is really fascinating. But we could probably do a podcast series on Don. When you look at his career, all the movies that he's made, everything from,
Bubba Ho-Tep.
Yeah, Bubba Ho-Tep.
John dies at the end.
Oh my God.
That's such a weird fucking movie.
Beastmaster.
Dude, I love Beastmaster.
Yeah, but we're going to specifically talk to him today about Phantasm, and then I'm going to try to convince him to come back on the podcast. And
please come back, Don.
Yeah, exactly.
Please.
Now, a couple quick reminders. Please support the Film Threat Podcast by going to our Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/filmthreat or go to patreon.com, look up Film Threat. There are all kinds of ways to support us, all kinds of things that you get in return for supporting the Film Threat Podcast. Also, follow us on social media. Normally, this is the kind of thing you do at the end of the show, but I feel like it's just a quick reminder that we're Film Threat on everything. Follow it. And the Film Threat website, filmthreat.com, is updated every day. So you need to be checking it on a daily basis. Just keep it in. You know what I do? Like the websites that I like, I just keep them open in a browser window. Refresh. I just like to refresh. So
mine pop up when I launch my Google Chrome.
Well, see, I do the same thing. I'm a Google Chrome person. I just refresh.
The best.
I know it is. I just refresh that page and get all of the the latest Film Threat reviews and whatnot. And also, if you want your movie reviewed on Film Threat, you're a filmmaker. You've been listening to this podcast. You've been enjoying the interviews that we've been bringing you. How would you like to have your movie reviewed on Film Threat? It's easy. Just go to our menu at the bottom. There's a button called Submit. Click on Submit, and you just send us your movie. We will review anything, your short film, your web series, your doc, whatever. I do think it's important, though, in the process to choose when you want to have your film reviewed. Maybe strategically, your movie's playing at a film festival, whatnot. Send us your film for review. We will review anything, and you can get it featured on our front page. Now, before we talk to Don, just a couple of thoughts about Phantasm. What was your experience of seeing it for the first time?
So my first experience with Phantasm was probably like 7 or 8, and it was on like maybe TNT or TBS or something like that.
So it was edited for television.
Yeah, it was edited, but they still showed like the sphere like going into the dude's head and spitting out blood, which is really weird because you would think that would be censored. Or maybe I saw it on like HBO or something. I don't remember what the channel was, but it scarred me for life. And I could not, like, for the life of me, figure out what movie that was. All I knew was that it was bloody. It had a little, like, silver ball that just drilled into people's heads. And I was reading a top 10 or top 20 list of, like, the best horror movies. And this was back when Netflix had the discs. And I had the 6-disc setup, so I'd get 6 movies at a time. And I totally rented the first Phantasm based on this list. I think it was like bloodydisgusting.com or something. And the cinematography is really, really creepy.
I don't remember seeing it in the theater. I remember seeing it on TV On TV was one of the first. This is really before traditional cable. On TV was programming that was, I think it was after like 6 o'clock at night. They would show movies past midnight, and it was every night on a regular channel. You had to have an on TV box, and it was just purely movie programming. And Phantasm was one of the films that played, and then I remember getting it on VHS, and it was just one of those ones that was you had to watch it every once in a while because it's just so weird. And what I loved about it was that it's all through the point of view of the kid. I mean, that was just really rare. And he wasn't a kid that had to be rescued or was in peril. He was an active part of the story.
Yeah, he was a knife-wielding, gun-toting,
right.
12 or 13-year-old.
Yeah, 12, 13 year. He had, he used guns, and his older brother instructed him with guns, no
warning shot.
No warning
That's
shot.
That's bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And then he drove cars, he drove a motorcycle. He, while he never got romantically involved, he did see his brother with a woman who bears her breasts.
That was weird.
And but it was cool because it was like that sort of enthusiasm was, oh my God, I'm seeing boobs for the first time. He was just, it was seeing the whole movie through his point of view just made the whole thing. And the fact that Phantasm didn't really have rules, I mean this in a good way, because I do believe for horror to work, you have to have some kind of rules, but know when to break your own rules. He cuts off the guy's finger, right? Puts it in a box. It turns into a weird giant fly that attacks them, that they have an impossible time trying to dispose of. I mean, it's just, what were the rules of this universe? There's some parallel dimension that they're sending these little bodies to, and the bodies are what? I mean, the fact that it was like you could interpret it, but there's no. I feel like it doesn't reveal everything where it ruins it,
I mean, the tall man doesn't really, they don't explain his powers. They don't explain really where they come from. He's just kind of this weird telekinetic
right.
menace, throwing things with his mind and stuff like that. I really like that. When you watch movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street or whatever, like they set up like who Freddy Krueger is, what his powers are. Jason, you get his origin story in the second one. It's like, this one, who the fuck is the tall man?
Right.
He's just a creepy dude.
Angus Scrimm,
yeah.
who's no longer with us, but...
Yeah, he passed away.
But I got to say, every time he says, boy, it's just frightening because it really is. It's the typical nightmare that you had as a kid, which is being chased, right?
Yeah, or
being chased.
That one line, the funeral's about to start, sir.
Right.
That's the stuff of nightmares. That's nightmare fuel.
I mean, what's interesting is I didn't realize with this Phantasm Remastered, there's a lot of things that were fixed in it. There's a scene that takes place in total darkness that in some of some of these other cuts that made it out, that scene has been cut. Now it's been restored in this remastered version. So because the person who was transferring it thought there was something wrong with the movie, so they cut out this few seconds of black, which is an actual scene. I mean, it was
what
like
an asshole.
It goes on for like 10 seconds, and there's they're having a whole conversation in pure blackness, and then of course there's the match is lit, and then. There's a lighter that's lit, and then surprise. Right.
I bet that scene in The Last Jedi where the sound cuts out really pissed that guy off.
Right.
He was one of those guys that probably went to the manager and complained.
But I'm really excited to talk to Don about this film. If you have never seen Phantasm, it is one of those classic horror films that reinvigorated the genre. I mean, it came out around the same time as John Carpenter's Halloween and really just got people excited about horror again, that you could do horror in a classy way. It doesn't have to just
super low budget,
but also there's a tone to Phantasm that resonates to today, and also spawned several sequels. And we'll talk to Don.
Yeah, 5 movies.
5 movies. Yeah. All right. Let's talk to Don Coscarelli. Well, first of all, it's an honor to welcome to the Film Threat Podcast Don Coscarelli. I've been a fan of yours since I was a kid. A fan of yours, since I first saw Phantasm.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for having me. You know, Film Threat is a legend in the indie film industry and has been for many years. Back to when the first time I ever found out about them, Reggie Bannister brought me a actual copy of the magazine, and it had a picture of, I think, him and you, or he and you, looking at some kind of phantasm ephemera. But this was, you know, back in 80s, early 90s, I think.
Wow. Well, I mean, so many, and I'm sure you hear this from a lot of people, that they saw Phantasm when they were a kid and it freaked them out. It's
myself included.
Yeah. Everyone.
And I saw the edited version.
Well, it's weird because I remember, I think my first memory of seeing it was on TV.
Yeah.
Which wasn't one of the early, I mean, this is pre-cable. It was one of those services, but it was one of those, like, every time it was on, I had to watch it again. It was
look, I wish I could explain exactly why. You know, I've met a lot of fans through the years, and I have to tell you, I do meet a lot of guys in their 40s and 50s who saw the movie then when they were like 10 years old, and it just never forgot. You know, I started thinking about that, and I didn't realize, you know, I thought we were making a horror film, but in some respects, I think we were making a young teen empowerment movie, because, you know, the kid in the film, you know, he had the older brother who let him drive his muscle car, and they're shooting shotguns and drinking Mexican beer, and, you know, had an effect on people. Certainly it brought a reality so that then the scares could work, because they really believed that kid. And of course, Michael Baldwin was one of the great child actors of his time.
Yeah, his performance really, I think, is underestimated how important it is to making the film work.
I had no question about it, because he had a level of subtlety and nuance, and especially, you know, after you've seen it dozens, if not hundreds of times, you start to see little things that he did in the performance that just always... There's this one scene towards the end of the film where he's creeping down the hallway of his house, and he knows that the tall man's going to jump out somewhere, and he just puts his hands out in front of him, like touching the walls as he's going down. And that wasn't a direction that I gave to him. That was something that he conjured up himself, which is pretty great for us, honestly.
One of my favorite things he does is he does it twice, I believe, where he mouths "what the fuck." I laugh so hard when I see that. That really stuck in my mind.
How did you find him? Because and also the whole cast, because everybody, there's a reality to it. It's also, I feel, it captured an era so perfectly. Really, the cast is just magical. And of course, you know, in the subsequent Phantasm films, most of the cast is there. So how did you find everybody?
Well, it was a function of having worked with all of them, honestly, because, you know, prior to Phantasm, I did these two films, which one was a drama and one was a comedy, and they got, you know, practically no distribution whatsoever. It's actually one of the reasons, or one of the motivations when writing the memoir, True Indie, is that to tell that story, because we had made this very first film, it ultimately was called Jim the World's Greatest, on such a modest budget, and yet then Universal bought it, and we finished it, you know, through Universal, but then subsequently it didn't perform at the box office, so it was as if the movie was never made. And on that film, one of the co-stars of the film was Angus Scrimm. And one of the peripheral supporting characters was Reggie Bannister. So you see, I had met these Angus was the first adult actor I ever worked with, and you know, met him at a really early age, and Reggie too. And then made Kenny and Company, my second film, which was more of a comedy. We got good distribution from Fox, but they put it out in a couple test markets and didn't know how to sell it, so went to the vault. So I'd made these two movies with no impact whatsoever. And that's when I hit on that old piece of urban legend about horror movies always make money. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to make a horror movie. And in the thought of making the horror film, I'm thinking, well, how am I going to populate it? Who am I going to put it in? And I had just worked with Michael Baldwin, who's co-starred in Kenny and Company, and he was brilliant. I thought, oh, what if it's a kid, and I'll design it around him. And what if they have a friend who's an ice cream vendor, and that could be Reggie. But who would be the overlord of this mausoleum graveyard complex? And then I thought about how I'd always been so intimidated by Angus, because the first adult I'd worked with, I thought, yeah, he could make for a good bad guy. And so I had this like little repertory company.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Angus Scrimm is such a great name to begin with. I mean, what in the script, as you're working on the script for Phantasm, which at least from the commentary, what I gleaned is some things were, not that you were making it up as you went, but there were things where you were shooting on weekends sometimes, and well, how was he referred to in the script? I mean, people refer to him as the tall man, but how was he referred to in the script?
Well, no, I came across that little dialogue where Michael says, "that tall man," and then I started to describe him in the script, what there was of a script. I mean, the script was ever evolving. I mean, that is, I think, maybe one of the successes of Phantasm, which I've tried to duplicate in some of the later Phantasms, is just the way it was made. I mean, when you're filming like on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Monday morning you sleep, okay? But then on Tuesday, you look at the footage that you shot the week and go, oh, what's going on here? What's working? What's not working? And then by Wednesday, you're starting to rewrite things and re-characterize the direction that you're going. And then, of course, using all this time to figure out the special effects and to find the locations and to do the things that most low-budget films can't do. So you're able to really, the logistics you can handle if you stretch it out over a number of months like that. But the good part also is that the script was never finished being written. It was always being written. And then ultimately I wouldn't say we finished shooting, we just stopped shooting and then edited and then went back and shot some more stuff. And which was the best part of now having most of this Phantasm company actors were all friends. They were around and available. So we had this movie that would be very hard to duplicate now. Well,
I mean, is that where ideas like a chopped off finger with yellow blood turns into a giant fly that terrorizes it? I mean, those kinds of ideas are so you just go with it. And I think that's part of what I love about Phantasm is that it definitely has so many WTF moments of what, and it's nothing is 100% explained. We don't know exactly what's going on. And I love that. I love that it's evolving. And then I remember my friends and I just having theories. And so it just, spurred discussion after, well, no, it's a parallel. And they're taking, the dead bodies and shrinking them and using them as slaves in this other planet. And I wonder if they go to the planet in the next, you know what I mean? Like all these great, it played on your imagination. I think that that's something that we don't see quite that often in horror.
Well, most films and most audiences, honestly, they demand to have their entertainment sort of pre-digested and all figured out, and what happens next, and how's it end, and how's it wrap up. And you hit on it there. I think one of the successes of Phantasm was its mystery. And, I was young enough at that time to take and had a level of youthful confidence back then, which I analyze a lot in the book, which is, I wasn't afraid to take risks. And I thought, the audience will just have to figure this out. So I went up to this cabin in Big Bear to write the screenplay on Phantasm, and I'm sitting there trying to come up. One of the mantras I had when I made the film is I wanted to make it scary. I want to have jump scares and scares like every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, because I had, as a young man, had gone to so many films and looked at these lurid posters that promised to scare the heck out of you, and you would get there and you'd just be bored. Nothing would happen. So I really had that I wanted to do. But the problem is that, thinking up crazy things, sometimes tying them all up is impossible. So I had this, I'm sitting up there in Big Bear, and I got one of these styrofoam cups, and I finished drinking my water, and I punched my finger through it, and I'm looking at this finger in the bottom of the cup, and I'm going, oh, now that's interesting. How could he get a finger in a little box or something? Oh, he could cut off the tall man's hand and then get the finger and take it home. And I think, okay, that's a bit of a stretch. But I just took it to a whole nother level, going into that alien insect thing, which then became beyond almost the scope of our ability to pull off in a way. So that was where that long shooting period, where you go, okay, we have to shoot this bug scene this week. How are we going to do it? Oh, well, easy way is they're going to get it into the brother's jacket, and then you don't have to see it, and they can fight with it, you know? So that was one solution. But then how are we going to get the thing to pop out and then to fly, which... And the funny part is in the 35 millimeter version that you watch the film, you could kind of see how we did the effect because we used a lot of fishing line, because we had this like rubber bug that, by the way, doesn't look anything like the bug that comes out of the box or the bug. None of the bugs look the same, but they're like moving around so fast that hopefully it would look good. But we got it to pop out and fly through the air. And this was the beauty of this remaster, was that the one thing was I was able to go through and erase all of the fishing line in the movie. And so now it looks pretty good when it pops out and flies like over Reggie's head and he dives out of the way. Because once the little glint off of the fishing line evaporates, then it's like, how the hell did they do that? So I think I didn't quite cover so what I was saying though is that I made a choice to do some of these mysteries, and I'll tell you leave it mysterious, leave it up to the audience to figure out some things. I remember a very early screening with some distributors in a little screening room, and we showed it, and afterwards there was some friend of a producer, and he turned to me and said, this movie has got so many plot holes, like what plot holes you could drive a truck through. And you know what? It doesn't matter. And that, at the time, I'm thinking, oh, Christ, how's this movie going to get reviewed, when a guy says something like that? But I think he was right on.
I can't stand people who nitpick plot holes. It's like suspension of disbelief, Well,
if it's a movie in sci-fi and horror and fantasy, I think you got to be able to roll with.
I think it's like it doesn't matter because you're so invested in the characters.
Yeah.
The characters are confused about what's happening to them. So is the audience. So actually, I think it's because that's the way that we're experiencing everything, all the craziness that happens. We're willing to accept it. It's all the same thing with, the original Alien by Ridley Scott.
Yes.
We don't know what's going on. What is this sort of evolving creature that's attacking them? Like, we didn't need explained what the space jockey was doing or what those eggs were doing there, why that ship craft was there, and I think that we've lost that sense of mystery. I think things that happen off screen, I think actually do impact people. Like the knowing that there's this bizarre parallel world, and I think that a lot of the effectiveness of those effects, the fly and the parallel universe, the sound in the film. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the score too.
The score is awesome.
You got to talk about the score and the sound because they're so effective.
Okay, but the problem is, Chris, you're just a font for ideas to think about. So I gotta dissect them individually.
Okay.
So the first thing I wanted to say, and I'm gonna, the interesting part of being a horror and sci-fi filmmaker is that so many of the fans that I meet are themselves aspiring filmmakers. It seems to attract that. So here's a note to aspiring horror filmmakers. So listen very closely to this. I really think the challenge is to do something unexpected because, and this is what you were alluding to there, in every, we are such rabid consumers of filmed media. We have watched so many episodes of TV and movies and sequels to movies that all of us pretty much, you know how they used to say that there are only like 6 plots in existence, okay? Yeah. We always know what's going to happen next because we've already seen it before. So the challenge is really to play with the audience's expectations and try to come up with something that is unexpected. And once you come up with something unexpected, then you destabilize the audience, and then they're ripe for old school puppet scares and what have you. And so anyway, that was my point on that. And a couple cases and points of recent movies that appealed to me that don't explain everything. I saw this film called The Endless, which I really liked a lot, and it had a lot to, without giving too much away, but it has some time loop things, but they do interesting things with it, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on. That recent film, Mandy, very unexpected stuff going on there. I loved
Mandy.
Yeah, a good film. And so there are folks still making movies that get that and are accomplishing it well. So anyway, so got that out of the way. Let's go back to your next point.
The sound. The sound is, I mean, any filmmaker will tell you it's like you're making the movie again, right? With the sound. So the music, incredible, and then the use of sound, especially in specific instances. Even like there's a shot of Angus Scrimm. He's just walking. I think he's just walking outside, but the sound is. His footsteps sound echoey.
Yes.
So it's not it's exactly what you said. It's not expected. It's wait a sec. This is otherworldly, in a sense. So tell me about the.
Well, first off, so excited that you respond to that because over the many decades of Phantasm, the sound has always been just a real. A point of emphasis throughout. I can still remember that, when you think about, because I had to do a lot of analysis in not only the release of the book and the release of the new Steelbook of Phantasm, but that to think about what were the motivations. And I remember that we made a conscious decision to allocate the budget. Number one, to put money into the effects for the sphere, to figure out how to do that. And the second thing was to squirrel enough money away so that we could actually do our sound post-production at what was the number one sound house at the time. It was the Baldwin Studios, which is now this place called The Lot. At one time it was Warner Hollywood, but they had the top sound mixing facility, and we had this crazy set of sound editors who were really talented and were smart enough to bring on this young man to do sound design for us. His name was Chris Stone, and he then ultimately went on to collaborate with Fred Myrow, our composer, on scores for Phantasms 2 and 3, and then he ultimately did the score for 4 and 5. But on the first Phantasm, he was the one that came up with the sound effects for the dwarf creatures. He had this old school analog vocoder, and he would just do this and create these sounds for that. And he was filtering the tall man footstep sounds, and then also creating effect sounds for the spheres using these old ARP Odysseys and Moog synthesizers. And so that was something that we really did at the time. But then continuing it, in the 90s, I was really always cognizant of trying to present the movie as best as possible, and got an opportunity to do a laser disc of Phantasm. And this was the first time to really show it in a good environment. And I had just made Phantasm 3, and I got with a now Academy Award-winning sound designer named Dane Davis. And I said, Dane, could you help me make a stereo version of the Phantasm tracks? He said, sure. And it was one of these things where we got into it, and I only had a few $1,000s, and he cut me a really good deal. But it was just like, week after week, I'm like, why am I spending so much time on this, at that time, 20-year-old movie to get it upgraded? But I did, and everybody really responded beautifully. So now fast forward to 2014, when I was gifted with this great opportunity, courtesy of J.J. Abrams, to do a restoration of Phantasm over at his Bad Robot Studios, and we'd finished it, and it came out great, and it was so nice of him to help to godfather that project. And then he just brought in his, like, one of the guys working on Star Wars who turned out to be a Phantasm fan. And he said, "Oh, well, we've got to do an upgrade." I said, "Great, let's do it," And this guy just went away, and he took all those original tracks, he took the stereo tracks, ripped them all together, and now we have it in this new Phantasm Steelbook on sale now, and it's amazing, really.
No, it's the best presentation of the film ever.
Yeah,
I mean it
looks gorgeous.
It's so incredible.
All those scenes in the mausoleum,
I do have a question. The Bad Robot logo appears at the beginning. Is there a deeper relationship in the sense of, J.J. Abrams? He does a reboot guy. He's brought Star Trek and Star Wars back in. Is there talk of a new Phantasm on the horizon? Representing it to a new audience and is J.J. Abrams' Phantasm a reality? Are you going to be doing? Is there something more? Is there something more to the logo being at the beginning? Or am I reading into this?
I think you're reading more into it. Let's face it, J.J. has bigger fish to fry. He's single-handedly resuscitating the Star Wars franchise and other things.
Right.
But that's not to say that Phantasm isn't continued. I have nothing interesting to say about that now. But the thing is I do believe that, jumping ahead, going up to the most recent Phantasm 5, and especially, of course, with the passing of our beloved Angus Scrimm, this iteration of Phantasm came to an end with which I thought I had said that in 1998 when I made Phantasm Oblivion, which is the weirdest thing about these Phantasm fans, and I guess it's my curse for having created these mysteries and then not completely ever solving them, but just the fact that I thought Phantasm 4 just nicely wrapped up the series and wrapped it up in a bow, a mysterious bow. But, then with the rise of the internet, I'm just going, when's the next one? When are you doing the next one? I thought I did it. And then, so then we do Phantasm 5, which really has a very final ending, I think, to it. And it was down at Fantastic Fest. And the first question's, what are you going to do for part 6?
But I don't know. I just think fans, they want to see more, right? Yeah. They want to see it's never ending, or it's rebooted, or in the case of the recent Halloween, they didn't even cleverly give it a new title. They just called it Halloween.
I hate that so much.
2018, and I think it's one of the better of the sequels.
Oh, I agree. It's my favorite of the sequels.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it ties directly into the original.
Just wish they would have called it something else.
Right, but I mean, is there a thought to not to ask that question again? And I mean this in the sense of maybe it's not a direct sequel, but is there?
Well, they've coined this term of soft reboot, which I think is great. And I will tell you that back in 2005, there was a real opportunity to do a series of new Phantasm films, and it was going to be with New Line. But at the time, they, the management or whatever, I proposed an idea to them, which was the ultimate soft reboot, which was to start the thing with a couple new brothers in a new town, and they go through with the Tall Man and hit all the tropes of the original. But in the third act, Reggie comes in, and it turns out it wasn't it seemed like it was a reboot, but it was really a sequel. Yeah. And so, Reggie and his team of battle-hardened tall man fighters. So, but they didn't get that. They wanted to get those hunky actors off of the CW network and recast the whole thing and do that. And so it didn't go anywhere.
As was popular at the time.
Right, right. Now, where did the idea of the sphere come from, and how did you achieve? You said you set aside money for those effects.
Yeah.
how is that achieved, and where did that idea come from? And there's, I mean, you could ask that about so many of the scenes in Phantasm. Where did this crazy idea and I think that's also part of the freshness of Phantasm is previous to Phantasm, where had you seen anything like it? Although I'm sorry, I'm asking like 9 questions at once. Because I'm just so excited to have you here. So tell me about the sphere and where that idea came from and how that effect was achieved.
Trying to really critically analyze how it happened. And of course, this is the process that I've been going through in writing this memoir, because I'm trying to figure out why I made some of these decisions. And I think that what my young mind decided back then was to make the movie unexpected, was to make it very classically horror, with almost a classic horror villain. But then as we got closer to the third act and the payoff, take like a hard left turn into science fiction. So that, because I'd always loved sci-fi as much as I loved horror as a kid, and so I thought that would be fun to exploit. So I had this idea to put this element from a dream that I had, and it's really the only element of a dream I've ever used in one of my movies. And that was that I had a dream in my teens when, and the weird part is that it was so impactful that I remembered the dream. Most of my dreams are weird and strange, but they flit right out of my head after I wake up. But in any case, so I followed this path where I would take this element, and it was essentially, I had been being chased down corridors by this flying orb, and it didn't have any of the juicy details from the movie in it. There were no blades and there were no drills in that, but it was just that this thing that I remember something about, there was like a little dispenser that they'd come out of and then fly after you, and I couldn't get away from it. So at any rate, I was going to put that in, and then I started to think, oh, what happens when it catches you? Oh, okay, well, it could, impale itself in the head, and then what happens? And oh, well, at one time I was thinking have some kind of a needle thing, and then I thought, oh, no, we'll go with a drill bit. And so having that and then figuring out how to put that into the movie and to get it on screen was a real challenge, superly huge challenge, because keep in mind, we're making Phantasm, it's pretty much like a friends and students crew. I mean, we had no money to hire any real film people, and but we had a lot of dedicated young filmmakers working on that movie.
Well, including a 16-year-old who passed out in the bar, who's now the head of the ASC, right?
Darren Okada, yes.
Darren Okada's head of the American Society of Cinematographers, was 16.
Yeah, he came to work. He was a grip on Phantasm, and we shot the extended scene in the Dunes Cantina. And of course, we had
that reference.
And we had a promotion with Dos Equis beer, and they had given us our production manager at the time, Bob Del Valle, had made a deal where we'd feature Dos Equis beer, and they'd give us 50 cases of this Dos Equis.
Oh my God!
And so we took a couple cases down to the bar with us because we brought our own. And I don't know if Darren had ever had beer or whatever, but after the wrap, he had a few, and we left him there. And it was an interesting story because the kid woke up and had to find his own way home. And then he went on, and he was the full-on cinematographer of Phantasm 2, and he was just great in it. And then the problem is he became a well-known cinematographer, and I could never afford him again. But we're still friends, and I hope to one day get a budget where I could afford Darren, but he's so talented.
But how was that effect achieved? I mean, at the time, it was unlike anything you'd ever seen.
Okay.
I mean,
well, all the details are in my book, but the shorthand of it is that we got introduced to a guy. Well, first, as a filmmaker, working my way through it, I started to realize that to accomplish any special effects shot, you need to break it up into the most discrete component pieces that you could achieve. And so it was like, I know how we could get the ball to fly around a corner. We put it on a piece of fishing line, and somebody's up there, and you just kind of push it, and it'll fly around the corner, okay? So we got the ball coming around the corner. then how do we get the ball to fly at us? And, we tried a lot of different weird things with like a stretched piano wire and throwing it, and it looked really wonky, and even took one of those Estes model rocket engines and put it in it, and it shot off the wire. It was just completely uncontrollable. And one of the crew, I wish I remember who it was, and they just goes, "Why don't you just chuck the damn thing?" And I thought, that's not a bad idea. We'll shoot it in reverse and have somebody throw it. So our art director had some experience in junior college baseball pitching, and we got like 3 or 4 spheres, and each time we threw them, they'd crack and be destroyed. But he just threw a couple fastballs down the mausoleum hallway, and we just happened and did some bracketing at different frame rates, and I think it was 60 frames per second was just the sweet spot. Because you think about it, like when somebody hurls it from behind camera, so its fastest speed is just as it goes by camera away, and then it slows as it's going away. So when you reverse it, it's coming at you slowly, and then it's speeding up and speeding, and then whizzes by camera. But putting it in a slow motion gave it just an otherworldly effect. So this was one of those moments where we watched the film that came back, and it was just like, oh, this is amazing! This is we were just so thrilled. And then. So that was the second component, and then we had another scene where the boy runs and dives, and the ball whizzes over him. So Dave would just throw it right over his head, and was really good to not hit him, and it shot through camera like that. But then we needed it to impact the guy's head, so we went back to reverse motion, and we basically taped and put it on with fishing, or tape and fishing line is what we made all the effects in Phantasm with, and we put it on his head, and then would yank it off, and then put it in reverse, and it would shunk, like that. Right. And so that's how we did that. Then the drilling, this great guy in Hollywood, his name was Will Green, but he was a special effects guy who built these giant turntables for auto shows that they put cars on. And somebody said he was really clever, and we went down and talked to him. And he said, I got this idea. I'll build you a rig, that sits on a whole rig, but the guy, you can't show it. You'll have the guy's hand will cover it, and that'll, we'll put a drill that'll come out and blades that'll snap out, and I'll put a blood tube in there. And so he was like a traditional, effects guy. I don't think he'd ever done horror films, and it was just this esprit de corps. It's like he started going in, like we went to pick it up, and when it's done, it looked great. And there's this bag of chopped up foam rubber, and I go, what's that? And he goes, well, I thought, when the blood's spewing out, you'll put that in and look like pieces of brain coming out,
Yeah.
But,
I gotta say that scene was the first kind of experience I had with Phantasm when I was a kid. I don't know what channel it was, but they showed that scene with the blood spurting out. Wow. Yeah. And I immediately turned it off. But I was telling Chris, that scene really, really just, it stuck with me for years and years. And I would ask my friends, what movie is this? I have no idea. I want to see it now that, I have, balls and I can handle horror movies. Right. And I found it on a list of the top 25 horror movies of all time. I had Netflix with the 6 discs when they were sending them through the mail.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, all right, I'll go through this list. And Phantasm was on it. And, I was a huge Fangoria fan. And I would see, images of the tall man.
Yeah.
So I'm watching the movie and experiencing it for the first time, and all of a sudden the flying balls came.
Oh, and then you knew what it was?
Yeah, I was just this is awesome. I finally found it. When I was a kid, though, I thought it was teeth.
Oh.
So I think maybe me asking my friends, hey, do you remember this ball with teeth?
Yeah.
But I gotta say, I watched it last night, and I ordered it on Vudu because my copy didn't come in the mail from Amazon yet. And I'm watching it. And you mentioned, you wanted to do the expected and keep mysteries and stuff like that. One of the things I noticed when I watched it the first time was you had that fortune teller character.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there and I was just like, all right, that's going to be the character that does the exposition. She has, some kind of, relationship with the tall man. She's going to tell us where it's from and everything like that. And I remember just being really impressed that we had no idea what was going on with the tall man, where he was from. I mean, you kind of hint with that picture. that he's older than.
Well, this was one of the problems when we went in to make the sequel with Phantasm Part 2, and we had they went through a research screening process, and so the first screening, very, very rough, that we showed. This is pre-internet, because you could do those big, like screenings. 300 people and show the movie, and they got some cards back saying that people were confused. So I got these really specific notes that the movie was, they were happy with it. It was good. But you had to go through and re-edit it so that the audience always knew what was happening at all times. And so that's consequently why in that movie, when you watch it, it tells you right up front exactly who the tall man is, because our female character says he was a grave robber from another dimension. And which sounds ridiculous. Okay, now that's what he was in the first movie, but since we never said it and you had to figure it out, so I think in my early ignorance, just somehow realize these things, that you could get away with it if you let the audience try to figure it out themselves. You throw a bunch of things at them, and in my mind, I always knew what he was. But I'm just thinking that, anytime we pushed a little too much or we explained too much, the movie got crazy.
You had his backstory all figured out when you were writing the script?
I basically did. Yeah, he came from another world, and he'd come through his dimension, and he was harvesting the bodies for slaves. And, again, when you talk about it like that, you're like, this is silly, and who would ever make a movie about this? But if you dole out little pieces of it, and it has, that where you can, in that later discussion with friends, because of this and this and this, there's a weird dream logic to it, I don't know.
I'm curious, you brought up the gypsy scene, and I'm just curious, because watching it now, I can't believe I never realized this. It's a scene. It reminds me of a scene from Dune.
Yeah.
The scene, the fear is the mind kill. First of all, I was obsessed with the book Dune in high school. I read it every year, the first book, and then went on to read, the first 4, which are all Frank Herbert. But that was were you inspired by that? And then there's also another Dune reference with the bar, like.
Oh, the bar? No,
not the bar.
That was the actual name of that bar.
That was the actual name of the bar. Okay,
yeah.
That's a coincidence. But were you inspired? Like that was, it's such a psychedelic, like weird, and that book has influenced so many people. George Lucas.
It's a great, great book. And,
right.
Whoever thought they'd make a movie out of it? I certainly didn't. But but of course, I was influenced by a lot of things. And what's weird is that when you take those influences and you make the film, it sometimes it just doesn't feel like by the time you're done and you put your own spin on it, it's hard for the original creators of influences to even catch that. Because, for instance, before I made the movie, I was really actually Reggie Bannister had brought me a copy of this great Ray Bradbury book called "Something Wicked This Way Comes," and I was at one time, and in true indie, I go into the whole story about how my partner Paul and I went up and tried to meet Ray Bradbury and talk to him, and that's an interesting story. But in any case, those rights weren't available, so then I went off and made my own story. It had, with some influence from it. Not that direct necessarily, but maybe more in style. And that movie, that book featured 2 young kids, and ours featured a kid. But in any case, the point was that at one of the promo screenings for Phantasm, I wasn't there, but Angus was there, and he went up and he says, "Oh, by the way, Ray Bradbury was at the screening." And I said, what did he say? And Angus says, "He said it was great." So, anyway, you take influences and make them your own, basically.
Now, I'm curious, when did you know and I'm sure these answers are in the book, and I have to apologize. I got the book like yesterday, so I have not read the book, and I'm hoping there's an audio book because
there is an audio book of True Indie. I actually recorded it myself.
Okay, great.
It was the hardest thing I've ever done.
Oh, really?
No, literally, it was like 30, 40 hours of trying to. I don't know. I'm not an actor, but I'm a director, so I'm trying to direct myself, but I'm not capable of taking my own direction. So it's terrible.
Well, I'm going to buy the audiobook because I'm obsessed with audiobooks.
Oh, are you? Yeah.
Well, if you live in Los Angeles, you're going to spend
it's that
8-10 hours in a car. That's enough for a book to listen to a book.
Yeah.
So
it makes you look forward to your commuting, honestly.
It actually does.
Yeah.
And I've missed exits. I've gotten, I always try to be early to things. I just try to be insanely, and I just think, well, if I get there, I'm just going to keep listening to the book.
Yeah.
But how did you handle, and I'm not even sure, when it first came out, was it a success? And when did you know that Phantasm was a phenomenon?
Phantasm was a success from the get-go. It was stunning, actually.
You're talking about the original theatrical release.
Phantasm, 1979. Yeah, no, it was. It was, and for a young filmmaker who had made 2 films that had gone straight to the studio vaults, it was a mind-blowing experience. I can still remember that Avco Embassy, they were very promotion-oriented, and they decided that the best way to publicize this movie was do sneak previews. And so they scheduled 4 midnight sneak previews the entire month before the movie opened here in Los Angeles, which is pretty insane. And they sold out every one of them, which was great. But the very first one, my soon-to-be wife was driving by Westwood. It was over at I think it was the Man Westwood there, that then became the festival. And she called in, and my friend who had co-produced the film, Paul Pepperman, picked up the phone, and I just heard him go, "Shelley, you're fucking kidding me," because there was already a line around the block, and we couldn't believe it. And then we got there, and it was great. And then the thing that was wonderful about Phantasm is that it also translated internationally, because it played, huge. I got these, before the internet, I got these like 8x10 photos from the Spanish distributor of like mayhem in front of this theater with all these people, and they had this gorgeous like Spanish painter had done a image of the kid falling through the red sky in front of this big theater. It was great. Anyway, it played there, UK, huge, Germany, everywhere, Japan. It was big. Yeah, it was a big international success. And
then also it really became a phenomenon when it was released on video, and you mentioned Laserdisc. That's, I think, when it really began to, because it's so rewatchable. The film is so rewatchable. It's one of those films that also, flipping through cable, you get to one, you're like, well, I have to see this scene.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so it's just because of the nature of just the bizarre series of events. You happen on anything, you're going to stop and watch it. When did that really reach a crescendo? I mean, theatrical, I didn't realize at the time was huge, but boy, the video, I remember the video being like a thing, and it was something where gatherings with friends, it's like, with any good horror film, it's always like, can you take it? And it's fun to watch your friends experience it. And
that was also one of the beauties of the original marketing campaign, which is if this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead. So it's a challenge that it's going to scare you. And it did become a party film. I think that when it was just a really successful horror film in the late 70s through the early 80s. But it wasn't until 9 years later when we made Phantasm 2 that I started to realize the depth of it, because you'd read the reviews of Phantasm 2, and it was always like, yeah, this movie's okay, but that original movie was a classic. And I think that making the sequel sort of cemented its place as, being something really special. And, I think that it has, look, there's a lot of reasons. We've talked about some of them. One of them we haven't really talked about is that the towering central performance of Angus Scrimm. I mean, he was, because he really, he brought something to it. It's all his. I mean, he only, if you go through and measure, he's only in the film for less than 3 minutes out of, what is that, like
About an hour and a half.
Yeah, out of 90 minutes, how many percent is that? He's like in the movie 5% of the movie.
Don't ask me to do math.
and he has a amazing impression on people. And I think part of it is that he came from a very classic background. You know, he grew up with Karloff and Lugosi, and I think he was channeling that kind of thing. But then the movie goes into sci-fi, and his fingers are getting chopped off, and turning, and still reanimating and having a life of their own, and yellow blood, and so there's a lot of things about him that make it really magnetic and durable over the years, I think.
Yeah. So then did you feel intimidated making the sequel, or was it, I mean, right time, right place? Like, and it's, taking a work like that has had such a cultural impact, and then like, okay, now we're going to do the sequel and sequels.
Yeah, well, from the get-go, I felt that the original movie was a one-off because, it was, bam, tall man wins, game over. How more finite could a series be there? Yeah. And so, years would go by, and I heard this, and at that time, it was a different time. Mm-hmm. Sequels were not as mandatory as they are now. And so, I'd always get hear that, oh, we have money to make a sequel. Do you want to make a sequel? No, sequels aren't cool. Nobody, people, I had read an article that Spielberg didn't like sequels, and he'd never make a sequel, which later he did many of them. But it was a different time, know? Yeah. And so I just didn't, and I didn't know where to start. It was over. The story was over. And so, probably 8 years later, I was in a situation where I needed to get funding for this film Survival Quest that I had made, or to get distribution on it. And people said, well, if you had a script for Phantasm 2 with you, we could make this whole thing happen really easily. And I thought, okay, I'll give it some thought. And had this breakthrough that seemed so simple and basic, but it was just that, oh, okay, so upstairs, Mike was downstairs with Reggie. He was playing guitar by the fire. Mike went upstairs. The tall man was in his room. His little dwarf critters grabbed him and yanked him through the mirror. What was going on downstairs with Reggie? So I thought, oh, yeah, well, he's playing guitar, and he hears a crash upstairs. So it was that most basic idea suddenly went, oh, well, hell, he ran up, interceded, got Mike out of there, and then the movie became a road picture, and they were going to track down and hunt and kill the tall man. So it was a different sort of a take, but at the same time, we got involved with Universal Pictures, and they were going to put up the biggest budget we ever had on a Phantasm of $3 million, which is, which was the smallest low budget movie they had made that decade. But for us, it was huge, and had all these resources, and hired. I met Sam Raimi, who was working over there on Darkman. And he said, "Oh, hire Mark Sjostrom, who did the effects on Evil Dead 2. Hire my art director from Evil Dead 2, Phil Duffin." Got those guys, and we started. And then Mark Sjostrom's junior assistants on the project were Greg Nicotero and Bob Kurtzman and Howard Berger before they made KNB. So we had all this talent working on it, and Honestly, and Phil Duffin built this beautiful mausoleum for us, much bigger and better than the original. I just remember walking through this. We're still making a low-budget movie, but I'm walking through and going, I could see making these Phantasm movies for the rest of my life. but I didn't know how true that would end up being. But it was fun. It was cool. We did a lot of great, there was no digital effects. It was all in-camera stuff, melting faces and melting hands on the tall man and eyeballs exploding and lots of balls flying around. And it was great stuff. And I thought the movie turned out pretty well. I liked it. But I don't know, Universal sort of mishandled the distribution of it, because they put us up against some really big tentpole movies in the summer, and it pretty much got creamed. But like the original, then 6 months later, hey, we just sold 100,000 video cassettes of this thing, so there was still life in it, which then generated part 3 and part 4 and then part 5.
So it reinvigorated interest in the first film.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you think that you're having done Phantasm, which I consider that first movie one of the rare perfect films, in the sense of...
Okay, let's just stop for a second.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. No, but I'm serious in the sense that, like, it's just... It's first of all, it's survived to today, right? We're still talking about it.
Yeah.
And there are other films, I think, that are in that category. I think the first Back to the Future.
Yeah.
I think the first Star Wars. There's like a... You just can't it's so hard to repeat it, right? That it's lightning in a bottle of all that, but then also the fact that it's just endured and something that's I don't know, just as relevant. You're not trying to push any message or social agenda with it. It's just, you know what, this is an experience. Is it I mean, and we haven't even touched on some of your other films. Can it be a burden sometimes, having had that? Like, do you feel that or no?
Hey, what am I? It was a genuine blessing. Of course, I've gotten to meet a number of other horror film directors who had success. It's also a curse. I mean, because, you go out, Phantasm, as I told you, I made a drama first, I made a comedy, and then I made Phantasm. And from that point on, if and believe me, I banged my head against the wall a lot of years, because I have a wide variety of interests. Like I got a great World War II movie, I got a comedy, I got just a straight sci-fi space opera type of thing. And, have a lot of difficulty ever getting any of those funded. It was very frustrating. But the great part was, as years would go by, I'd always have the opportunity financially to go back and make another one. And the thing is that, you spoke so reverently, and thank you so much about talking the movie, and really appreciate that. But at the same time, that was a blessing. But the other thing is that Michael Baldwin, Bill Thornberry, Reggie Bannister, Cat Lester, and Angus Scrimm, these core actors from that film also became lifelong friends of mine. We are still pals. We are all like family. And so for all of us, it's been great. And, one of the best parts, other than the fact that people pay you money to come, but we can go to these horror conventions and hang out together and reconnect. And that was another one of the, from a personal level, it was a magnificent experience in my life. But, were there some downsides to it? Yeah. But, you look at all the, many of the other directors of the genre from that period, and boy, they were on that same slippery slope trying to get out of there. But all of them have made great movies too.
Well, first of all, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the Film Threat podcast to talk to us.
Thank you so much.
At some point, we have to get you back because we have to talk about Beastmaster, Bubba Ho-Tep.
Beastmaster was my childhood.
John dies at the end. There's so much more to discuss. And when you come back, I promise I will have read the book. I'm going to have a lot more questions for you. But Phantasm Remastered is out in a special Steelbox edition. And can I just say, extras galore, 2 commentary tracks that are incredible, behind the scenes that are just fantastic behind the scenes, and rare home movies, and it's the ultimate edition of this, and I've owned it several times. So.
Yeah, just a tag to that. If you get it on Vudu, the special features are not there.
Yeah, you got it,
which was heartbreaking.
Yeah. First of all, it's cheap on Vudu,
yeah,
so it's like $8 or $9. But the remastered Blu-ray, which you must get, you can find it on sale at a reasonable price. So pick it up. It's something you have to have. And then
it was on sale at Amazon.
And true indie Life and Death in Filmmaking by Don Coscarelli. Whether you listen to it in the car like I will be, or whether you have a physical copy of the book, pick it up. Don, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you guys so much. This has been great.
Phantasm, the delusion of a disordered mind, a phantom, a spirit, a ghost. For nearly 4 decades it has been contained, but evil always has a way of breaking free.
Tommy's gone. It's hard to believe. It was a good idea not to let your little brother come to the funeral.
Hey, I don't like this place.
Something weird is going on up there.
The funeral is about to begin, sir.
What's wrong with you?
There's something up there. I saw it.
You got some kind of an overactive imagination or something?
I know you're not gonna believe this, but these things were here.
Oh, give me a break.
Okay, I believe you. What we gotta do is lay that sucker out flat and drive a stake right through his goddamn heart. You're gonna run that tall bastard straight down to hell.
You play a good game, boy. But the game is finished. Now you die.
Phantasm.
Don't fear.